The note was folded with quiet precision, tucked between quarterly reports and a printout of projected numbers. At first, Grant Ellison didn't even see it. It was just a sliver of cream-colored paper in a sea of grayscale. But when he reached in for his pen, it fluttered to the floor like a secret trying to stay hidden. He picked it up without thinking, intending to crumple it as just another errant scrap. Then he saw the handwriting, fluid, careful, unmistakably not his assistant's, not his son, either. It had no logo or header, just the note. I still think about the look on your face when you realized I wasn't going to fight back. I hope someday you understand why I didn't. It wasn't signed with a full name, just M, but Grant's mind filled in the rest before he finished reading. Myra. Myra Camden, the woman he let go just before Thanksgiving. The woman who hadn't spoken much in the meeting where HR handed her a polite exit and a severance package bigger than necessary, because even then, Grant hadn't known how to sit with the quiet weight of disappointment. She'd only said thank you, not a word more. He read the note again. It had no date, but it felt fresh, like it had been written recently, and that made no sense. No one could access his briefcase. It stayed locked. He carried it himself. The only time it wasn't in his hands was when he froze, memory catching up. Last Friday, the parent career day at Riverlight Elementary, he'd reluctantly brought his work bag into the school library while waiting to speak. Some kid had knocked it over, papers spilling like confetti, and a woman, long hair, low voice, too fast for him to place, had helped him gather the mess. She hadn't looked at him directly, worn a scarf, kept her head slightly down. It had been her. Grant sat back in his office chair, the note in his hand like a confession. The edges felt too delicate to be from a woman he remembered as whip-smart and capable, someone who'd once told him, in a rare unguarded moment, that she used to write poetry when she couldn't sleep. Myra fired in the fall, vanished after the exit interview. No calls, no retaliation, just gone. Until now. He looked past the glass walls of his office at the life he had built like armor. Everything was order, structure, schedules, and underneath that, a quiet fatigue that rarely left him, even when he tried to convince himself that providing for his son was enough. Julian was 9, bright-eyed and impossible to keep still. He hadn't asked why his mother no longer called on his birthday. He had stopped asking 2 years ago. Since then, Grant had doubled down on his roles, CEO, father, provider, but never quite present enough to feel like any of them fit. And now this note. A woman he barely remembered outside of performance reviews had left him a thought wrapped in emotion, and he didn't know what to do with it. He texted Lauren, his assistant, asking her to push back his next meeting by 30 minutes. Then he did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He sat still. The room around him buzzed faintly with the sounds of the office. Somewhere a phone rang. Voices outside his door traded in the language of business, metrics, revenue, acquisitions. But in his hands, the note made none of that feel real. He remembered the day he fired her. It had been raining, the kind that left streaks on his window. Myra had come in early that morning like she always did, wearing that same green coat that looked too worn for someone who had once presented a flawless pitch deck. Her team had been underperforming, it was true, but Grant had known even then that the data didn't tell the whole story. She had a son. A sick mother, maybe. No, an older sister with early-onset dementia, that was it. She'd come in late twice that month, and HR had flagged it. But she hadn't fought. He remembered expecting an argument. Instead, she'd smiled faintly and said, "I understand." And then she was gone. Now, months later, she had left a note. Not to challenge, not to accuse, just to be remembered. That night when Julian had fallen asleep on the couch with a comic book on his chest and a chocolate smudge on his cheek, Grant sat at the kitchen table with the note in front of him. He looked up Myra's file. Inactive, deleted. He tried LinkedIn, nothing current. Then, against his usual impulse for control and discretion, he typed a message into the parent portal from Julian's school. To Riverlight Elementary Staff Directory. Subject: Parent Volunteer List, Inquiry. Hi, I'm trying to reconnect with one of the parent volunteers who helped during the career day last Friday. Her name is Myra Camden. If she's affiliated with a student, would you mind forwarding my contact info to her? Thank you. He didn't expect a reply quickly, But the minute he pressed send, the weight in his chest shifted, not gone, just moved. In his room, Julian stirred and mumbled something about a dragon. Grant smiled faintly and got up to tuck him in. The note stayed on the kitchen counter, the last line catching the light from the street lamp outside. "I hope someday you understand why I didn't." Grant read it again before turning off the lights, his world just slightly tilted from its axis, and for the first time in months, he didn't reach for his phone before bed. He just lay there, staring into the dark, remembering a woman he thought he'd forgotten. Myra hadn't expected him to find the note, or if he did, she didn't expect it would matter. She hadn't planned to stay long at the school, just volunteer for her son's class, avoid eye contact with the man who had once called her a misaligned asset, and slip out before anyone noticed. But when the office secretary called 2 days later to say a parent from Career Day had requested to reconnect, Myra felt something shift inside her. She stood in her kitchen with the phone still in her hand, the world quiet around her except for the hum of the fridge and the soft breathing of her son, Caleb, curled up in the worn armchair by the window, a blanket over his legs and a pencil between his fingers as he doodled dragons in a notebook. Grant Ellison wanted to speak to her. She hadn't heard his name in months, had done her best to box that whole part of her life away, the version of herself that wore pressed suits and stayed late for meetings no one remembered she was at. She had been proud once, walking into that office every morning, thinking she was building something that mattered. But the company hadn't needed her humanity, it needed performance metrics. Still, she wrote back, "Dear Mr. Ellison, I received word from Riverlight Elementary that you requested my contact. I imagine you found something I left behind. It wasn't meant to start anything, just something I needed to say, but I appreciate your reaching out. Myra Camden." She didn't expect a response that night, but it came, short, direct. "Myra, I did find it and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Would you meet me, not to discuss the past, unless you want to, but just to talk? There are things I'm beginning to see differently. I'd value your insight." Grant. She stared at it a long time before replying. The next morning they met at a small coffee shop on the corner of Maple and 8th. Neutral ground. No glass walls, no offices, just the smell of cinnamon and rain on concrete. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a window seat, his coat draped over the back of his chair, tie loosened, hands wrapped around a cup he hadn't drunk from yet. He stood when she entered, she nodded. They didn't hug, it would have been strange. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said as she sat across from him. "I wasn't either." A silence, not awkward, just heavy with the weight of two people unlearning what they thought they knew. "You left the note during Career Day." "I did. Why?" She studied him. The man who once couldn't look up from his laptop during meetings was now watching her like every word mattered. "Because I realized something," she said. "I didn't leave that office angry, I left quiet, and I carried that silence for too long. I wrote that note for me, not for you, but I think part of me hoped you'd read it." He nodded slowly. "I did," he said, "and I kept thinking about what you said, about not fighting back. I didn't understand it, not then. And now." Grant looked out the window. The street was wet, the clouds low. People passed by with umbrellas and hoods, each in their own hurry. "My son been asking more questions lately," he said. "About things I used to think he'd grow out of, like why I don't make it to his school plays, or why I work so late when I say I miss him." Myra softened just a little. "I used to think efficiency made me a good father. That stability was enough, but when I saw you at the school, something shifted. You looked different." "I am different." He turned back to her, eyes quieter than she remembered, less shielded. "I've made a lot of decisions that made sense on paper," he said. "Letting you go was one of them, but I don't think I realized how much humanity I cut out with those choices." Myra stirred her coffee, though she hadn't added anything to it. "You didn't know me, not really, just the numbers I was attached to." "I know that now," he said, "but I didn't just ask to see you to apologize." She looked up, guarded. "I asked because I want to understand how someone like you, someone brilliant, managed to leave with grace, when most people would have burned everything down. Myra smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Because I had something more important to carry," she said. "My son needed me whole. I couldn't give him bitterness. I barely had enough strength to get him through the fall." Grant's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. "I don't want your guilt, Grant. I don't even want your apology. I just wanted someone to remember that I didn't vanish. I adapted." They sat with that for a while, long enough for their coffees to grow cold. Then quietly Grant said, "Do you still write?" She blinked. "Right. You mentioned it once, that you wrote poetry when you couldn't sleep." Myra hesitated. "I stopped for a long time. Lately I've started again, nothing serious." "Would you show me something someday?" She looked at him, trying to find the motive behind the request, but all she saw was a man unraveling slowly, carefully, honestly. "Maybe," she said, "someday." They didn't linger much longer after that. He offered to walk her to her car, but she declined. As she stepped outside, the air felt clearer. Not lighter, but honest in a way the office had never been. Back in his car, Grant didn't start the engine right away. He sat in silence, the hum of her voice still fresh in his mind. That night, Julian ran into the kitchen wearing a paper crown and announced that he had been voted class king of creativity. Grant didn't check his email once during dinner. And Myra, back in her apartment, found herself writing again, a poem about regret, about grace, about how sometimes the people we least expect end up being the mirrors we needed. She didn't send it, but she didn't throw it away either. And somewhere in the middle of the city, a man who used to measure life by output and meetings began to rethink the shape of value and the weight of things unsaid. The second time they met, it wasn't planned. Grant was walking Julian into the school building on a Wednesday morning, late because Julian had insisted on bringing a shoebox diorama about ocean pollution and refused to let Grant carry it. The boy's stubborn streak was growing by the week, and Grant, already juggling a delayed investor call and a half-done proposal, felt frayed. His patience thinned further when the crossing guard waved them in just as the final bell rang. They rounded the corner into the library hallway, the shoebox slipping in Julian's hands, when Grant heard someone laugh. He turned. Myra was crouched beside a small girl in pigtails, helping her hang up a painting on the classroom corkboard. Her laughter was brief, almost surprised, but it stopped him like a memory coming alive. She hadn't seen him yet. She wore a loose sweater, sleeves pushed up, hair pulled into a knot that was falling apart. Not polished, not poised, just present. Julian saw her before Grant said anything. "That's Ms. Myra," he said casually. "She reads to us on library days, her kid's in my class. Caleb, he's cool." Grant blinked. "You know her?" Julian shrugged. "Kinda. She helped me with a book once when I couldn't find the one with the dragon that eats homework." Before Grant could respond, Myra looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither moved. Then she smiled, not the reserved smile she'd given him at the cafe, but something closer to recognition. "Hi," she said, rising slowly. "Didn't expect to see you here." Grant managed a nod. "Me neither." He insisted I stay until the box made it to the teacher's desk. Julian held it up proudly. "Pollution sucks," he said, "but I made sharks out of clay." Myra crouched again, examining the small sea creatures with mock seriousness. "You gave one of them sunglasses. I respect the artistic risk," she said. Julian grinned, then darted into class before Grant could react. For a second, he and Myra stood in the echo of children's footsteps and hallway chatter. The door shut behind Julian, and it was just them again. "I didn't know you volunteered here regularly," Grant said. "I don't advertise it," she replied, "but it matters to Caleb, and it matters to me too." He nodded, unsure what to say next. The silence settled easily this time. "I was thinking about what you said last time," she added. Grant looked at her. "About what?" "About wanting to understand, about seeing things differently." He hesitated, then nodded. "I wasn't lying." "I know." Another pause, then she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Caleb has Saturday soccer in Pine Grove Park. I'm always there. If you ever wanted to stop by with Julian, no pressure. Just, she shrugged, it's open space. Open space. Something about the way she said it struck him, like she wasn't offering an event but a reprieve. He almost said yes right then. Instead, he said, we might come. That night, Grant told Julian about the park, about how maybe they could bring snacks and see if any kids wanted to hang out after the game. Julian, who had never shown much interest in sports, asked if there would be hot chocolate. Maybe, Grant said, if you help me find that thermos I bought and never used. Julian smirked. You mean the one Mom gave you for Christmas before she left? Grant flinched, caught off guard. It had been a long time since Julian mentioned her without prompting. Yeah, he said, that one. Julian tilted his head, watching him. You look less tired lately, he said, before running off to feed the cat. Grant stood there for a moment, unsure whether the comment was a child's whim or something deeper. On Saturday, the park was already busy by the time they arrived. Soccer balls rolled across the grass, parents gathered in small clusters with coffee cups and lawn chairs. Grant parked a little farther down, unsure if it made sense to be there. Then Julian spotted Caleb near the edge of the field and took off, yelling something about sharks and homework dragons. Grant walked slowly toward the sidelines, feeling out of place until he saw her. Myra sat on a blanket under a tree, her boots off, a notebook on her lap. She looked up when he approached and moved her bag aside. You came. I did. No tie, she teased. He looked down at his sweatshirt. Julian banned me from dad clothes today. She laughed, then offered him a corner of the blanket. They sat side by side, not close but not distant either. The air was cool. The game had barely started, a cluster of kids chasing the ball like bees after a moving flower. They're terrible, Myra said fondly, but they try so hard. Grant smiled, it's kind of beautiful. She glanced sideways, you're not what I expected anymore. He turned to her, what did you expect? I don't know, coldness, guilt, maybe some corporate charm offensive. I was those things, he admitted, still unlearning some of them. Myra nodded, then looked at the field again. Sometimes I think the reason I didn't fight you in that office wasn't just because I was tired. It was because I knew I didn't want to stay in a place that couldn't see what I had to offer. I kept waiting to be chosen, not realizing I'd been choosing the wrong things. Her voice wasn't bitter, just calm, certain. Grant didn't respond immediately. He watched Julian run clumsily after the ball fall, then laugh like nothing mattered. I was choosing wrong too, he said. They sat there a while longer. No plans, no resolutions. Just the quiet recognition of people who had once collided in a sterile room and were now sitting under a tree, watching their sons make joyful messes of the world. As the game ended, Caleb ran over with grass stains on his knees, Julian trailing behind him with flushed cheeks and a grin. Myra packed up slowly. Grant offered to carry her bag, she let him. They walked to the cars together, kids in front, talking about snacks and worms and the rules of soccer that didn't make sense. When they reached the parking lot, Myra turned to him. You ever let yourself be bad at something? She asked. He raised a brow, define bad. She smiled, like paint outside the lines, trip over your own words, start again without knowing the end. Not often, he said, but lately I'm reconsidering. Myra nodded, good. And then she got into her car, Caleb waving from the backseat, and pulled away. Grant stood there for a moment, the bag still over his shoulder, his son beside him, sticky with juice and laughter. He didn't know what was coming next. But he wasn't afraid to find out. 2 weeks passed before they saw each other again, not because anything went wrong, but because life, with its quiet momentum, kept moving. Work crept in like water under a doorframe. Caleb caught a stomach bug. Julian got a nosebleed during recess that stained his favorite shirt and sent Grant into a mild panic when the school called. They exchanged one short message midweek, a photo Myra sent of a book Julian had recommended to Caleb, now sitting dog-eared and loved on their kitchen table. Grant replied with a smile emoji, then stared at it for 10 minutes, wondering if he should have said more. But then Friday arrived. Julian's school hosted a spring showcase, art, music, a chaotic attempt at theater. Grant left the office early. He silenced his phone in the parking lot and told his assistant not to call unless the building was on fire. He even stopped at a bakery and bought lemon squares, Myra's favorite, though she had only once mentioned them in passing while helping Caleb with a paper mache project at the library. The gym was packed with folding chairs and nervous parents pretending not to cry. Grant found his seat in the third row. Julian was backstage, his name listed under spoken word group presentation. Grant had no idea what that meant. He spotted Myra standing off to the side, wearing a soft blue blouse and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was talking to one of the teachers, her hand resting lightly on Caleb's back. Her expression was open, animated, easy in a way that still surprised him. He was used to women looking polished but closed off. Myra looked real. When she turned and saw him, her eyebrows lifted slightly in a way that said she hadn't expected him to come. He smiled. She nodded once. It was enough. The lights dimmed. Children shuffled on stage, fumbling with microphones and lines they half remembered. Julian spoke clearly, though, his voice bright and certain as he read a piece about dragons that protected oceans and kids who built kindness out of cardboard. Grant didn't breathe for most of it. Afterward there were cookies and applause and chaos. Children ran in every direction. Myra found him near the juice table. "Did you hear that line about cardboard kindness?" she asked, smiling. "I did," he wrote it himself. "He's turning into someone very good," she said. Grant nodded, his throat tighter than it should have been. "I keep waiting to mess it up." "You're not," she said quietly. "You're showing up, that counts more than you think." They stood there while Julian and Caleb debated whether dragons should breathe underwater. Someone spilled orange juice nearby. A toddler cried. And in the middle of it all, Myra looked at him with that same quiet knowing he'd once mistaken for detachment. Now he saw it for what it was, restraint born from depth. "You doing anything after this?" he asked before he could overthink it. Myra hesitated, then said, "I could be convinced." So they drove 2 cars, 2 boys, 1 idea. Ended up at a diner outside town, the kind with vinyl booths and paper placemats that doubled as coloring sheets. Julian ordered pancakes for dinner. Caleb got a milkshake bigger than his head. Myra sat across from Grant, tired but relaxed, her arms folded on the table, a half-smile playing at her lips. "This is surreal," she said. "I used to think of you as this storm in a suit." He raised an eyebrow. "That bad?" "No, just distant. I think I made you colder in my head than you really were, easier to blame that way." He nodded slowly. "I think I made you smaller than you were, safer that way." The honesty between them now had no edge. It felt like settling dust, a space clearing. After dinner, the kids ran out ahead to the small patch of grass near the parking lot, racing to see who could find the most stars before bedtime. Grant walked Myra to her car. She leaned against the door, the night air cool and soft. "I keep waiting for the part where this feels strange," he said. "It does." He shook his head. "It feels like I've been trying to reach this version of my life for a long time. I just didn't know what I was aiming for." Myra looked at him for a moment, then down at her hands. Her fingers were ink-stained from the ballpoint pen she used to jot things in her notebook. "I've been thinking about the day you fired me," she said. He stilled. "Yeah." "I used to replay it in my head, wondering if I should have said more, fought for the position, pointed out the places I held things together when nobody noticed." "You did hold things together," he said quietly. "I noticed, just too late." She looked up, eyes steady. "Would you do it differently now?" He answered without hesitation, "Yes." "But you're still the same man." "I'm not sure I am." Myra exhaled slowly. "Maybe that's what forgiveness is," she said. "Not erasing the past, just letting it stop dictating the present." The boys ran past them, shouting about constellations. Julian skidded to a stop. "Dad, can we do this again next week?" Grant looked at Myra. She nodded. "Yeah," he said, "we can." Later that night, after Julian had fallen asleep, Grant stepped into his office for the first time in days without opening his laptop. Instead, he pulled open a drawer and found the note, the original one, faded now from being folded and touched too many times. He placed it back carefully, not to forget it, but to honor where it had led him. Across the city, Myra wrote another letter. Not to Grant, not for him to find. Just for herself. A new kind of note. This one about beginnings. Spring leaned into summer slowly that year. The city was caught in a soft bloom of longer evenings and windows left open past dusk. Even the buildings seemed less severe, their reflections less sharp in the early light. In the quiet gaps between school drop-offs and work deadlines, a rhythm began to form. Not a routine, not yet, but a rhythm, like breath finding steadiness after a long climb. Grant found himself waking before the alarm more often, making breakfast without checking his emails, letting Julian stir the eggs and spill half the salt without rushing to clean it. Sometimes they listened to music. Other times they just moved around each other in the kitchen, saying little but being there. He hadn't seen Myra in 10 days. Not by avoidance, just life. The kind with appointments and permission slips and an audit at his firm that came out of nowhere. They still texted now and then, short messages wrapped in warmth. When he finally called her one Thursday evening, it was already late. He wasn't sure she'd pick up, but she did. "Hey," she said, voice a little hushed. "Did I wake you?" "No," she said, and he could hear her smile. "I was reading, Caleb's out cold, long field trip." He paused, then said, "Would it be strange if I asked to see you tomorrow, just us?" There was a beat, not hesitation, just time enough for something honest to settle. "No," she said, "not strange." They met at the botanical garden just after lunch. It was Myra's idea. He hadn't been there since Julian was in kindergarten, when everything was a blur of forgotten sunscreen and juice boxes. Now the place felt different, slower, a path carved into green silence. They walked without much aim, passing blooming irises and shaded corners that smelled like rain even without clouds. Myra wore a long linen dress and flat shoes, her hair pulled into a braid down her back. Grant felt slightly overdressed in his slacks and crisp shirt, but she didn't seem to mind. They found a bench near the Japanese pond. The koi moved lazily in the water, bright flashes under the surface. "You look rested," she said after a while. "I think I am." "Is that allowed?" He smiled. "I'm still checking." A gentle wind stirred the maple leaves above them. For a while they didn't speak. The silence between them had become something to share, not fill. Myra turned to him, her voice quieter now. "Do you know what surprised me most about you?" "What?" "You listened, really listened, once you stopped talking." He gave a soft laugh. "It took me years to learn how." "It shows." They watched the fish. Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm not the same man I was last fall," he said. "I don't mean I'm fixed or done changing, but you cracked something open. I've been learning how to stay open since." Myra watched him, something thoughtful in her gaze. "I don't need you to prove anything, Grant. I never did. I just wanted to know you could see me, that you could see people." "I do now," he said, "especially you." She looked down at her hands, fingers laced in her lap. "I've had offers to go back," she said, "to different companies, same kind of work, same expectations." "Are you going to?" "I don't know. I used to chase the kind of success that made people nod in meetings. Lately, I've been chasing stillness." He nodded. "I used to think I was building a future for Julian by working nonstop. I see now that I was just surviving. He didn't need a provider. He needed a witness." They sat with that truth, the weight of what they had both lost and what they had found in the wreckage. "Do you want to come by tomorrow?" he asked after a while. "Dinner I'll cook." "You cook?" He gave her a look. "I've learned. Julian supervises." She smiled. "I'd like that." He reached for her hand, uncertain until she let him take it. Her fingers were warm, steady, not hesitant, just present. The next evening, Myra arrived just as the sun began to dip behind the buildings. Caleb and Julian disappeared into the living room, arguing over board games. In the kitchen, Myra leaned against the counter, watching Grant wrestle with a lasagna he had overfilled. "It's chaos," he muttered. "I'm pretending it's intentional." She laughed. "It smells like hope." He looked up. "That's dramatic." "I used to write poetry," she said, lips curving. "Remember?" He did. He always had. They ate together at the dining table. No distractions. No noise except the boys laughing over mismatched game pieces and Myra's quiet amusement when Grant tried to serve salad with a spatula. Afterward, they sat on the balcony while the kids finished dessert. The city glowed below them, a different kind of quiet wrapped around the evening, not awkward, not waiting, just full. Myra turned to him. "Do you ever think about the note?" she asked softly. "All the time." "What does it mean to you now?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said it was a beginning disguised as closure. Myra nodded. "That's what I hoped." They sat until the boys grew tired, until the city lights blurred a little, until the night asked them to decide whether this, whatever this was, had space to become more. As she gathered her things to leave, Myra lingered by the door. Caleb yawned beside her, tugging on her sleeve. "Do you need a ride?" Grant asked. "No, but thank you." She looked at him then, eyes clear. "I'll see you soon." "Yeah," he said, "soon." And as the door closed behind her, the quiet in the apartment didn't feel like absence. It felt like promise. Not the kind that rushed or shouted. The kind that stayed.